Welcome to Biomorphic Networks 3. If any of you have attended the first two Biomorphic Networks, they were more using the plugin as Mădălin was developing it, and each version was like a new kind of beta. Now we have the official launch of the first version, which you can make sure you download here. The link was also posted in the chat. Make sure you download it. Also, there's example files as well. That's the plugin we'll be focusing on today with Mădălin. Let me give a short introduction for Mădălin. So Mădălin holds an MR from UCL Bartlett. He worked at Research Lab, Wonder Lab, directed by Elisa Andrusek, alongside Andy Lomas and Doug Hancan. The main focus was on advanced computational workflows with the use of high-resolution simulations and robotic fabrication. He continues his involvement at the frontiers of advanced architecture and design and the convergence with science and technology. He was a key part of the team of the National Pavilion of Croatia for the Venice Biennale in 2018 for design and construction of one of the world's largest 3D printed structures. Currently, he's developing his startup, Drag and Drop, which I'll drop a link to later, in Bucharest. Technology company specializing in large-scale 3D printing, and I guess now we should add to your bio that you are the developer of Nuclei.
Yeah.
So quickly, before we start, just want to remind everyone again, stop sharing here. If you have questions during the webinar, please use the Q&A button. Also want to remind you that you will have a recording. Information is there. Recording will be emailed after. You'll get a link emailed after the webinar when Zoom processes the video. It can usually take a few hours to a day. And if you did not whitelist our email address like the registration page suggested that you do, it may end up on your spam. So please keep an eye on your spam folder as well. If you want for chat, make sure you switch the chat to say everyone. Otherwise, you're just writing to me. And yeah, use that Q&A button and keep in mind the amount of time we have and the knowledge that Mădălin needs to share. If you can't keep up, just watch and reference back to the recording later. Cool. I'll hand it over to you, Mădălin.
Thank you, Mike. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending in such large numbers. Thank you for your interest in Nuclei. I also want to take a moment to thank Design Morphine for hosting the webinar and also for all the support during the development. It took a long time to develop it, probably more than 1 year. So yeah, here we are. First of all, some people were asking on Mac. They had some problems with downloading the files. I've posted in the chat. I've posted the Google Drive link where you can download it if you cannot download it on Food for Rhino. Just so you have it. All right. Cool. So Nuclei is a plugin based on swarm intelligence. In this particular case, it's we're focusing on an organism called slime mold. Slime mold is a hot research topic. It's been like so in the past 5 to 10 years. So researchers all over the world started looking into it. Not necessarily as an algorithm, but more as a like even doing tests with real life slime mold. The reason behind it is that it is an organism that is very good at creating transport networks. So basically, it's very good at distributing and making those transport networks as efficient as possible. Its own survival depends on that. You know, it's an organism that's been around for thousands of years. And it is it is a way of creating a collective intelligence. I'll share my screen and we'll go over a few things. So first of all, I want to, so I'll share first my screen. Right, so first of all, bear in mind the fact that so if you go on Food for Rhino and I look at the description of nuclei, you will see that it is based on a research paper. Here in the Food for Rhino link, you will see that I've already posted a link to this research paper, which is based on. So Jeff Jones is the creator of the paper, and he's the mad scientist behind it that basically translated the natural logics of the slime mold into an algorithm so that we can use it in digital simulations. In the plugin, besides the basic slime mold simulations, I've also included a lot of my knowledge on generative systems. So we will talk about them later in the plugin, but basically I wanted to make a tool that I could use in my work as much as possible, and hoping that other people will find it interesting. So yeah, make sure that you check the link with the research paper. The reason behind it is that the link will show you a lot of settings of the slime mold or different kind of states and behaviors that it goes through. So in your own time, like it would be great for you to take a look at the paper. Not for the technical aspects, that's not important. What's important is that they have like all these catalogs with different behaviors of slime mold, and you can definitely learn faster than just by playing yourself. Working with generative systems, there are a lot of different possibilities for influencing the behavior. Just doing research by your own, it's going to take a long time. So I would suggest that also from the experience from the masters, like the fastest way of learning is like looking at those catalogs and making catalogs of your own. All right. So the way I want to go about it is first I'll talk just 1 more minute about slime mold and swarm intelligence as a theory part. Then we'll quickly go through the algorithm mechanics. So just so you get like an overall picture of like how things work and why they work in a certain way. And after that, we will start with the example files. Make sure you have them downloaded. We will go through them one by one. We don't have the time to slowly go through each one of them. I'll just insist on the first one for the basic setup, and then we'll just open one by one, and I'll explain what happens inside each one of them. All right. 1 second. Okay, good. So regarding the algorithm mechanics, 1 second, we have a question. Nuclei file should be. It's in the file, so there's a folder in the drive, and then there's another file, nuclei2 GHA. You should find it there in the Google Drive. All right, so the algorithm mechanics. The algorithm mechanics are the algorithm basically has two different ingredients. One of them is the particles, and the other one is the voxels. So the way swarm intelligence works, it's like swarm intelligence is a collective intelligence that emerges from the interaction of the small parts, in our case, the particles, with other particles and the environment. The particles themselves are quite dumb, so they're not very intelligent, but the interactions between the particles and the environment, taken all together in large populations, tend to create an intelligence that is quite evolved, and it's more than the sum of the parts. So the algorithm itself is quite simple. It works with very simple rules. But together in this generative system, it creates something emergent that is more complex than than what we would normally do with procedural design. All right, so the algorithm has two components: the particles and the voxels. The particles are basically the things that move, and the voxels are a data structure behind that keeps everything in place. All right, so for the particle has an orientation, so it's like you and me. It looks in a certain way. It has a certain orientation. And then we have the voxels. The voxels are distributed in a grid. Voxels are will represent it in 2D just because it's easier to understand. Voxels basically divide the environment in chunks of space. As you can see in the image, they have some numbers. These are their addresses. They can store different types of data, from their address to the number of particles which is inside of each voxel, to the number of particles around it, what happened a few frames ago. So basically you can store a ton of data in these voxels, and the denser the voxel field, the more accurate the data is. All right, so the algorithm steps are these six steps. So what it does, it's basically we have a particle, and it has a sensor distance, which is this is the length of this blue arrow. So basically, its sensor distance means that it can sense, or it can see around it at a certain distance. So from the left arrow to the right arrow and the front arrow, these are the places in which it samples the voxels around it and looks for data. The data that it looks for basically is called density. In this drawing here, we have the different coloring of the voxels from lighter to darker. The lighter the voxel value means that the higher the value inside the voxel. So just let's think about a number from 0 to 1. That's called the density. And the particle will, like its main focus is to go towards the highest value. So what it does, it looks around it, it samples the voxel fields. It looks in each voxel at the value that's the highest. When it finds the highest value, in this case, this voxel with the address 1, 3, because it's lighter than the other ones, it turns towards that value, and then it moves towards that value. When it moves, the amplitude of movement, it's always going to be smaller than the sensor amplitude. And this is normal. It's the same thing as we experience. We can see 20 meters apart, but we won't be able to reach in a fraction of a second that space. All right, once it moves, yeah, so it basically samples the voxel field, turns towards the highest value, and moves towards the highest value. In this case, the particle did not leave the initial cell, but it can leave the initial cell depending on the amplitude of the movement. And the next step is to deposit these density values, which are called chemoattractors. So these chemoattractors, you can think of them as smell or other ways of communicating between small organisms. Ants have the same thing, and other different small organisms communicate with chemoattractors. In these theoretical examples, we will call it density. So after moving, it deposits a certain amount of chemoattractors, a value that we can decide on, which is larger or smaller. The next step is to diffuse those chemoattractors. Same thing as with smell, it diffuses in the air, and it gets weaker and weaker the further away it goes from the initial voxel. You can also think of it as blurring. So when you blur an image, you basically combine the values from each pixel to the pixels around it. And that's what diffusion does. And after diffusing, we also decay the chemoattractor. So basically we subtract a small value. Otherwise, if we weren't doing this step, then you know, after 100 iterations, the whole vector field full of high values. So that's an important step. So going back to all the steps, we look around for the highest value. We identify that value, move towards it, deposit a chemoattractor value on the voxel field, diffuse it, decay it, and then we go all over again to the next step, right? So in a nutshell, that would be the algorithm mechanic. They're simple steps. Those 6 simple steps are everything. You might not get the whole picture right now, but you will in time when you start working with it. Cool. All right. So the next step after that is to start working in Grasshopper, and I would like to go there because it's a bit more intuitive when we start seeing it move. Yeah, and you will have this as a reference. Also, the Jeff Jones paper describes everything in excruciating detail about how the algorithm works and you know, different particularities of the algorithm. But since we are working in Grasshopper, we have a tool that works, and we don't necessarily need to be proficient in how the algorithm works. But I believe that it's important to have like an idea of how this works, just so that it's easier for you in time to control the algorithm. All right, so going back to Grasshopper, the most basic intro is like we have 3 different panels in Nuclei. We have the environment, we have the particles, and we have the solver. We have the preview as well. So, as I said before, we need to construct the voxels, and we need to construct the particles. I'll use the bifocals so that everyone can follow easily. All right, so we need this, and we also need the solver. The solver has a special place for particles, one for voxels, right? Similarly to Kangaroo, in the old days, you would have a trigger to toggle the simulation reset on and off. And we also have a timer or trigger if you're on Rhino 7. On Rhino 6, it's called timer, right? And we connect it to the solver. So to connect it, we basically drag this part into the solver. All right, this will tell the solver how often it will start computing again the next iteration. So when things move and are animated, you can think of them in terms of frames or iterations. So each time like a frame passes, there are like all these calculations done inside the solver that will calculate the next step for the movement. All right, we still have two components that are orange. This means that they have some problems. Input parameter particle position failed to collect data. All right. Okay, so first of all, since we are working in 2D, all right. So this is our, if we use this component called extract voxel bounding box, we can see the voxels, the size of our environment. In the voxel size, we can control the X, Y, and Z. We will use X and Y for 2D simulations for this first part of the webinar. And in the second part, we will move to 3-dimensional simulations as well. All right, so let's say we have a grid that is 100 by 100. Yeah, 100 voxels by 100 voxels. We can also extract the voxel positions if we like. And I tend to, yeah, so these are the positions like the centers of each one of those cubes or each one of those squares that we talked about in the intro. A way to add particles would be to either populate 2D with random points inside this box, but you can randomly reduce these numbers of points, these points. I would choose the second part, not populate 2D, because you will see that in more complex examples, populate 2D is an algorithm that a component that runs very slow on large numbers of starting points. So you don't want to waste time with that. The best solution is to use the random reduce. Oh, wait a second. Right, so we use random reduce. We have a list of points. We have a number of points, and we want to reduce, let's say 0.9 or 90% of that number. So I will multiply the number of points. The number, so we have 10,000 points multiplied by 0.9 means we will reduce 9,000 points out of this. All right. If I unpreview this, it's all right. Like playing with this slider, we can increase or decrease the number of particle position. We assign this to the particle position. You don't necessarily have to follow this with me, just because I mean it's a simple example, and ideally you would follow me instead of like trying to do it on your own, because this is something that you will do anyway. So all right. Okay, so if we turn this to false, wait 1 second, we need to extract the particle positions. All right, so we can already see something happening there. Yeah, so all these points start moving. Cool, so the basic setup is constructing the environment, assigning the initial positions for the particles, and then feeding the particles and the environment inside the solver. And this is how we create an animation, or this is how the plugin works, more or less. Of course, we have a lot of components that we'll go through during this webinar, but at its basic core, this is how it works. You need voxels or an environment. That environment can be customized in very many ways, and I will show you how to do that. You need the particles. Particles as well can have different types of behaviors. We'll talk about all of those in the coming tutorials. And we need to feed the voxels and the particles inside the solver so that we can preview what's happening and to start the simulation. All right, so let's get back to the basic intro. Just because it's better, like, you know, I have all these groups here. They look a lot better like that. We also have like a better preview. You have this component called cloud display, which displays everything better than points, than those initial points. All right. Okay, so this is how the simulation would look at on a grid, which is 350 by 350. As I was saying, the larger the grid, the better the simulation, or the more intricate the simulation. Yeah. All right. Cool. So I hope the basic intro is easy to grasp. We have some answers. All right. Is it similar to Game of Life logic? Well, no. Game of Life relies only on voxels, so we don't have any particles. Voxels are like, we only do operations with voxels, look at neighbors, kill or give birth, depending on the density of the population in a certain place. So it's different from Game of Life, but they have some similarities in the sense that both of them are using voxels as an underlying data structure behind it. All right, cool. Okay, let's go to the next example. So this is the proper intro. In the proper intro, it's the same thing as the first one, with some exceptions. And you can see the slime mold already starts looking different. The reason is that when we define the particles now, instead of just using the basic particles supplied with the default settings, now we have this thing that controls some different parameters for the particles, different parameters for the trails, as well as different parameters for the voxels. So let's talk about those parameters, right? So we have a few of them. We have the speed, so that's the increment of moving. We have the sensor distance, how far we can see. So like, for example, let's say we have this particle, and if we have the sensor distance of, in our case, it's 4. So this is the field of view, how far a particle can see. All right. Each particle, as I was saying in the intro, will probably have an orientation. And this orientation is a vector pointing in a certain direction. And then we have sensor angle and rotation angle. The sensor angle, I'm not going to bother to make it exactly 30 degrees, but think of it as it can look 30 degrees to the left and 30 degrees to the right. So if it can only see basically in this area, yeah. So this is where the particle sees. Now we can have a sensor distance, and we can look. We have like a narrower sensing angle, or we can have a wider sensor angle. And the amount of rotation when we find the highest value for the voxel. So let's say that we have like a large field of view, and we can see maybe 90 degrees instead of 30 degrees. And then we can see something that's on our far right. But then we have a rotation angle that's very small. If the rotation angle is 15 degrees, then I won't turn towards what I see. I will just turn 15 degrees in that direction. So sensor angle and rotation angle are two different things. And by playing with them, we will see how they affect the simulation. All right, so let's start with the first thing. We'll talk about deposit afterwards when we talk about the voxel settings, but let's start with speed. All right, so we can make the simulation like the increment of moving smaller, and you will see that the pattern itself will change, or we can make it larger, and then the pattern, it will change as well. As you can see now, my speed is larger than my sensor distance, and everything starts to become quite messy, because it's basically like I can only see 10 centimeters in front of me, let's imagine, but I move a meter with each step. So, of course, my movement will start to become quite disorganized, right? But if we increase the sensor distance, you can see that they start organizing again. So usually for patterns that are not messy, we'll always have a sensor distance larger than the speed, which is normal. You know, it's normal, happens in everyday life, and this is how the algorithm works as well. Okay, and then let's restart the simulation because it's okay. Right. So let's say we have a large sensor angle and a small rotation angle. Look, if my rotation angle is 0, they basically don't rotate at all. Yeah, so they just go in a linear direction. If I have like a very large rotation angle, think of it like this. It's like, let's imagine that I have like a narrow sensor angle. Yeah, so I can only see in front of me. But then when I turn, I overshoot because I turn with 92 degrees every time. And this will make me run around in circles around my tail. So that's exactly what's happening now with the slime mold, because the rotation angle is so big, right? But if we turn it into a smaller rotation angle, then they start connecting again. All right, let's say we have like a rotation angle of 45. This is also the default rotation angle. And so with a sensor angle that's like very narrow, they will get disoriented as well. With a sensor angle that's very large, they will start running in circles around their tail. And something in between will create the connections and the trails. All right. So talking about the trails, we have a component that records trails. So this component tells the solver, and it goes into settings, and it tells the solver to record the trails. The reason behind it is that we can also display these trails in a more fancy way. Right, this display it takes a longer time to compute, but it's good for presentation kind of work. So So yeah, just bear in mind that in this component, we tell it the trail size. So you can see that each particle has a trail. So meaning it records the movements that it made a few frames ago. And we have the setting of 5 previous trail points that we record. Of course, we can move it to a larger number, and our trails will become longer. Okay. So you can see now that it's made up of more points. And we also have the trail frequency. So in the solver, you can see the iteration number. And at each iteration, it records a trail if the frequency is 1. If the frequency is 5, for example, it would record the trail once every 5 iterations. All right. So when we have something that's at a frequency that's larger, we basically skip a few steps, and our simulation will start becoming a little bit less accurate, just because it records at a frequency that's higher. But then again, if we go back to 1 and we leave it for a few frames, we can see that we can trace the movement of the particles at each and every frame. All right. So this is how the different settings affect the behavior of the slime mold. I could talk about this for a whole day, and you can play with it for a whole week, and you will still learn new things, because they're quite simple. You could develop an intuition of how they work. But then it's a question of time and experimenting to see, how actually each one of these settings influences the algorithm. Because it's a generative system, the small changes can have a big impact. And they are also not so easy to to predict. It's not like in a procedural kind of scenario in which you know exactly what you want to do, and you want to use the computer for automating that task and making it as easy as possible or as complex as possible. In this case, it's something that it's kind of like a negotiation between what it does, what you think it should do, and it gets somewhere in the middle. So at the end of the day, it's, you're going to be the designer, but this is designing with a digital organism that has a kind of its own brain. I mean, it's not a smart brain, but it has its own kind of will, let's say. So it's always going to be back and forth, and you're never going to be so proficient. I mean, I'm not proficient after playing with it for 1.5 years. I'm still surprised for things that it does, and surprised in a good way. I always look for, unexpected things that happen, or those transitional moments that offer like this interesting type of aesthetics. All right, but just so you know, like this is like a small intro of what each one of these settings does, and soon we'll reach the end of the first hour, so I'll start moving towards the definitions. But before that, let's take a few more minutes to talk about the voxels as well. All right, so if we look at the voxels, let's see. Let's make I'll make a grid structure. Grid. Which one was the grid? Vector grid. Ah, square. Okay. All right. So, all right. So all these particles work in this Yeah, so in this voxel, this is how a voxel looks in our simulation. We also have this number here, which tells us that we have 40,000 voxels. All right, so each particle, as I was saying, it does just one, like basically each particle looks for movement, it looks around it and goes towards the highest value inside each one of the voxels. And it also deposits value on the voxel field. All right. So for the voxel field, we can display the environment. We have these components here. All right. So you can see that where the particles are, we have like different colors for each one of these boxes. We have different colors. The more it turns red, the higher the value. The less it turns red, the smaller the value. Maybe I disable this preview and let's look at this other preview. And you can see how the different values, you know, the particles deposit values, those values are being diffused in the environment, and then they constantly change. All right, so for each one of the particles, we have a deposit value. If I were to make this deposit value to a very large number, you can see that all the places that have particles have this area around them that starts to get a tint of pink, meaning that they start having values larger than 0. Of course, what we see in the preview is the latest stage of the algorithm, in which after the particles deposit values, those values get diffused and decayed. So in order for something to be red, constantly red or constantly bright pink, it means that a lot of particles in those areas are depositing. You see, you have like a high density of particles depositing on the voxel field, and that's how you get like large numbers. You will see that like with very high numbers, like they start turning the whole voxel field red, meaning that they will start soon to feel disoriented, and they won't create a cohesive pattern anymore. But if we go back to the initial value that we have, which is 2, they will start turning back into a nice pattern. Again, for displaying the environment, this is also something that takes a little bit of resources to display. So it's something more of a toolbox for you to better understand how this works. But it's not something that I would advise you to have running every time you run a simulation. So you can just disable these components and use them whenever you want to visualize something, right? All right, like here. Okay, so these values are very powerful. They get stored in the voxel field as data. Now, as I was saying, each particle deposits a value. In this case is 2. The maximum value in a voxel is from, so like the values in a voxel are from 0 to 1. But when you deposit 2 or 10 or 20, those values basically, like each particle deposits values on voxels. The voxels record all the values from all the particles, and then they put a cap, meaning that if the value is larger than 1, it will remain at 1. And then they get diffused at a certain range and at a certain rate and at a certain range. All right, so for example, if we get like this particle, it will probably deposit in this voxel, and then it will get diffused and with a rate and with a range. Okay, the larger the range, the more voxels will be around it to get diffused. As you can see now, like everything starts to become a bit more blurry. So it's not like such a big contrast between the pink areas, the bright pink areas, and the transparent areas. But if we get the diffuse range okay, if we get it to 0, for example, let's see what happens. As you can see, the particles only, you know, the voxel field looks as, you know, pixelated. The reason behind it is that, you know, the values inside each voxel are not combined with the values around it, because I've put the diffuse range to 0. Now maybe in a more aesthetic way, it starts looking with like the game of life, but it's not. But then when we start increasing the diffuse range, you can already see that they start like blurring and combining those values. And also, like, you know, this is how you create a pattern, because those values get dispersed and they travel in the voxel field, and other particles will sense them from a larger distance. All right, so this is what the diffuse range does. The decay rate is basically you have a number that subtracts from the voxel values at each frame. If, as I was saying in the intro, if we have the decay rate at 0, the particles will add and add and add the values on the voxel field. Well, in this case, they are quite already in a pattern, but otherwise, like, they will start adding and adding and adding. And if I were to have like a slightly larger deposit value, the whole field will become red without the or bright pink without the decay rate. Yeah. So when you increase the decay rate, you can see that they only have values in the places where probably we have like a larger density of particles, but that's not good either, because they stop making so many connections between them. I would say 0.01 more works in most cases, but you are free to experiment with other settings. Always bear in mind that when you find some right settings, make a print screen, save the file, because it's really easy to lose them, and it's really hard to get them back. But also, you know, you have all the tutorials, the example files, you can start from them, and then it should be easy for you to get back on track if you're lost with the settings. All right, so in this intro, I wanted to talk about these different things. Another thing I want, like the last thing that I would mention in the intro, we also have this Boolean for wrap. If we set it to false, we will see that the whole environment will not cross the boundaries, like the whole simulation will not cross the boundaries. When the wrap is set to true, they will start crossing the boundaries. And just as an idea, the particles that go out through here go in through here. So this kind of pattern can be, it's periodic, so it can be used, it will be continuous. It's almost like having some tiles that always match themselves. So for example, on the x-axis, if we were to move everything with this value 200, yeah, you can see that this pattern can be infinitely placed. If we were to use y, yeah, on this side as well, it's continuous. So yeah, this is how you make the. This is how wrap works. It's basically creating this space that connects with itself. All right. So we talked about the intro. Let's start doing some interesting simulations because we have a lot of things to talk about. You can do a lot of things with nuclei. This is just the basic intro. One interesting example is when we have multiple populations. So in this example, we have two populations represented with two different colors. So we have two particle systems that run on a single voxel field. Each one of the particle systems has different settings and they interact with each other. You can see that the green one is more connected and the blue one is more insular, so more disconnected. Because they work on the same voxel field, the green one will try to connect as much as possible with all the values inside it. And you can almost see like, you know, you have these areas where this green ones almost like pull the well, they're not blue, they're purple. The purple ones towards the network. So it's almost like yeah, like it's trying to keep everything in a network. And this is what happened. The way to go about it is basically we have the same kind of setup. We have the voxels. We have two different sets of particles. Of course, we have some initial starting positions for some particles and other initial starting positions for the others. In the particles, when we define them, we can include the, I forgot to mention this, it might be important for some of you. If you want your simulation to work the same way every time, you have to include an initial kind of particle directions. Otherwise, a random particle direction will be assigned every time by the solver, and the simulation will be slightly different each and every time you run it. But with generative systems, I would say that, you know, it's normal. Even if you have like in nature, if you have like a species of plants, you know that the leaves look in a certain way, the way they grow, it's in a certain way, but you will never find two plants that have the exact same geometry, the exact same growth logics, yes, but not the exact same geometry. The same is true with the generative systems. So to be honest, I didn't bother. I never bother with that to have this exact same simulation. But if you want to, you can have it by assigning the vectors for the particles. Make sure you have the same number of vectors for the same number of particles, right? If you do that. Anyway, another thing that you can assign is this particle tag. So basically, you need a tag. You can write here anything you want. You can write 1 and 2, doesn't matter. Yeah, as long as they are connected. So you need to know that these particles will have these particle settings, and that's why you have the tag. These particles will have these particle settings, right? If I have two particle systems, but they're both with the, you see, I have like one tag and two particle settings. It will basically just read one of them. So what we need to do is have the same, like now that we have this, you can see that everything starts creating a network and moving. Let's say that if we want these two to become the same as the second, yeah, so we can either have one or the other. Well, never mind. Just keep in mind that like I'm going into something that I haven't tried yet, so don't bother with this. Just what you need to remember from this tutorial is that you have like two different sets of particles, and you can connect the particles positions with the particle settings, and you need to give them a name or a number, doesn't matter, just a way to identify themselves. So this number here, this text, will make the connection between your particle, which particles from which starting positions, and what kind of behavior they will have. All right, so I've chosen two extreme examples, one with particles that are insular and they will never create networks of transport with that. And some particles that make connections, and the interaction between them creates this kind of simulation. We also have environment settings, which are very similar to the previous example. Here, this long part of the algorithm of the definition is just for display. So don't bother with it if you don't understand it completely. All you need to know is that we are using something called GLSL shader. It might not be, or I think most definitely it is not available on Mac yet. But it is available on Windows. If you right click on it, you can select the way of drawing. If we create line strips instead of points, it displays as lines, or we can display points, right? So it's up to you which kind of display you're more eager to use. And this part here of the algorithm, basically just because the particles go out in a certain fashion. So in this list, the first number from this tree is the number of the particle species, let's say. And the second number from the tree is the index of the particle. And the number of, we have 5 trail points. So each particle has 5 points inside. This is how it's outputted. So the number of the species, the index of the particle, and then you have the points. And basically in this, we are splitting the tree so that we represent the first one with 0, which has the 0 at the beginning in a color, and the one with 1 in a different color, right? So the two different species are represented in 2 different colors. I'm splitting the tree here. I know which parts are, these are with the one that connects probably, or no, this is with the particles that connect. This is with the ones that are insular. And then we feed them all here and we display them accordingly. All right, so this is how you can work with multiple populations. You can work with as many populations as you like. The algorithm won't run slower because you have more populations. It will just run slower if you have larger populations. So if the more particles you have, or the larger the voxel field, the slower the algorithm. So, you know, it's a balance between how much performance you have on your computer, what you want to achieve. The highest density is not the best density. The right density is the best density. But from experience, larger voxel fields create more interesting results. So larger resolutions here at the voxels create more interesting results. So for example, if I had this in a 30 by 30 voxel field. We'll look at it now, and you'll see that the simulation just won't be that interesting anymore. Right? Even if we go to 100 by 100, it's still quite small, but already you can start seeing things happening. Well, so now it's not necessarily like, yeah, it's one of those patterns that you get like by default. It's not necessarily a very interesting pattern, but then, for example, let's say we have a 500 by 500 resolution. Yeah. It will probably run a little bit slower now. Or possibly crash the computer. Let me just disable this part, which makes everything run slower. All right, so our simulation already starts becoming more interesting with a higher voxel resolution. But as you can see, the time is increased. If you don't have this part, you can, from display canvas widgets, you can select the profiler. Yeah, from display canvas widgets, profiler, and this will show you how much each component takes to compute, just so you know that, you know, how much time it takes for each part before it reaches your screen. All right. Okay, so we're done with multiple populations. Let's go to the minimizing transport networks. All right, so you can see a few different things in this next example. First of all, even though my environment is a grid and it's always going to be a box, in that environment, I can customize and only choose some parts of the voxels and not all the voxels. So you can see that this simulation, for example, only runs inside this circle and it never runs on the other parts. So just so you know, voxels are always going to be boxes. It's just the simplest way of, and one of the most efficient ways of partitioning a space by boxes. And they will always be boxes, but you can carve those boxes and you can create your own environment, be it a circle, a curve, or whatever you need for your design, you can do it. So let's have a look at how this is done. So the usual setup, we have the voxels, the design space, this time 250 by 250. Then we have the particles. The particles are pretty basic, so nothing particularly interesting happens with the particles. The only thing we do is like we choose the starting positions of the particles, and then we run the simulation. Even in this case is like we have particles going outside of our design space. Our design space is inside this circle, yeah, so not more than this circle. But because we've defined our design space in the voxel components, we won't need to do that with the particles initial positions. The solver has a default thing inside it, so if your environment doesn't use all the voxels, there's no point in creating particles in those voxels because they will do nothing. So it just discards them. Okay, so basically, like everything is the same as the first two examples. We take some voxel starting positions. Yeah, we take all of them. We randomly reduce 90% of them. And these will be the starting positions for our particles. All right, but a lot of things are happening inside the voxel operations. Okay, So if we go to this, so the way to create this environment that's based inside this disk that I've created here. So I'm basically creating a circle, extruding it, converting it into a mesh, and then I have this opportunity of only selecting the voxels that are inside that mesh. This works in 2D and 3D in the same kind of way, right? So from my initial voxels, I've selected only those ones, and this is done like we have a few components: curve attractors, mesh attractors, point attractors, or voxel inclusion in mesh. In this case, we're using voxel inclusion in mesh, this component. And we're selecting only these voxels, right? And basically we are saying, we are telling the solver that you will only use these voxels, you won't calculate anything else from the others. But when the voxels are creating, their data structure requires them to create all of them, even the ones in the corners that we will not use. So it's just the way that things work. Another thing that I've created here, besides the fact that everything runs inside this circle, another thing that you will notice in time, if you let the simulation run for a little bit, is that there are some certain points like these ones that always have particles around them. Now, the reason why this is happening is because we also manipulate the values inside the voxels. So what I'm doing here, I'm selecting these voxels around these points coming from this hexagon. And in these ones, I have something called define voxel values. And in these parts, only in these voxels, we will always have food. So think of food as like, for example, slime mold in reality, like researchers use oat flakes for food. And slime mold basically, that's what it does. It finds food and then it creates networks of transport of that food inside its organism so that it can distribute its nutrients as good as possible throughout its body. So it's a question of survival. If it doesn't distribute those nutrients in the right way, then in the most optimized way, then parts of it will suffer. All right, so this is how the food works. So in our case, in the digital environments, the food is basically, I'm representing all my voxels with black and white. And when it's white, then it means that food is present in those areas. And when it's black, it means that there's no food there. As I was saying, particles are always attracted to the voxel with the highest value. Considering that we've used this component, which defines the voxel values. So basically here, I'm just selecting the points, selecting the voxels, and then here I've selected the voxels, and here I'm defining what type of value and what value. So the type of value is food in my case, and the multiplier value is 10, so meaning that it will always be like this huge number, like these cells will always, these voxels will always have a high content, like of high density, meaning that they will always have particles. And yeah, This is how they minimize the transport networks here. So we started from a hexagon, we reached a hexagon. All right. We can use other types of values, and we will discuss them in the following tutorial. But just so you know, in this tutorial, we've learned how to select voxels. Yeah, so we can select them with select the voxels either with mesh inclusion. Yeah, so we have this mesh, and everything every voxel that's inside this mesh is gonna get selected. Another way is by selecting them with attractor points. In this case, I have the attractor point. I have the maximum range of my attractor point. Yeah, so this can be larger or smaller. And the food will go accordingly, right? Yeah. Cool. So this is how you select voxels. And this is how you define the voxel values in this part. Yeah, so we have in the panels, in the environment, we have construct voxel, define voxel values. We also have this for voxel selection. We have a few other components, and we also have these things for combining different values and for extracting different types of data from the voxels. We will also talk about them step by step with each example that we work on. Right. So we have 9 examples in total. Let's go to the next one. This one will take a little bit more because we'll start interacting with it and playing with it. Sometimes some scripts take a longer time to load, but don't be afraid. Like loading and running a simulation are 2 different things. So if a simulation loads during a long period of time, it doesn't mean necessarily that it will run slow. Yeah, so this is running at quite a good frame rate, 34 milliseconds per frame, which is okay. Okay, good. So in this example, we use voxel selection, and we define different values in different ways. All right. Everything else is the same. So we define a voxel environment. We do some voxel operations in these parts. The particles are as basic as possible, so nothing special with the particles. We feed the particles in the solver, we feed the voxels in the solver, we feed the settings from trails to what other types of settings that we have. And then we run the simulation. But the most interesting part is manipulating the voxel value. So why this is interesting? So first of all, you have a very highly customizable voxel field in Nuclei. So you can customize it as like there are tons of different ways in which you can customize it. So in this example, let's start with something simple. Let's start with speed, because I think speed is the easiest to understand. So as you can see, first of all, let's look at the voxel position. So I'm selecting the voxels inside inside this this curve. Wait a second. Yeah. Okay. And then I'm using curve closest point just to map the values from a higher value closer to the curve to a smaller value further away from the curve. We can visualize it. All right. In order to visualize it, we are looking at speed. So we should visualize speed as well. All right. Okay, so let's look at this circle that has this kind of gradient inside. So how we achieve this? We, like, if I were to put just a number, you would see that all the values that I've selected are going to have that number. If I have a higher number, the lighter the color, right? So in order to create differentiated values, I'm using a curve attractor and I'm remapping the distance from the curve to each one of the centers of the voxels, and that number will give me a gradient. All right. And now let's look at what the particles are doing if we just use this. And you can see that what's happening inside our simulation is that the particles that are closer to the curve or in the white areas, they have a certain kind of speed. And in the other areas that are darker, they don't move because their speed is very, very small, all right? So if I were to increase the speed, 1 second. So what you need to know is that particles are interactive. So every time you change a value in the particles, the value will change in the simulation. In this case, nothing changed in the simulation. We need to reset the simulation. The reason behind it is that otherwise we would have to read at every frame if any changes are done in the voxel fields, and that would take way too much time and it would make the simulation way too slow. So you basically, every time you set up the voxels, you set them up, and if you change anything in the voxels, then you would need to restart the simulation so that those changes can be taken into account. Otherwise, they won't be taken into account. All right, so in this case, you can see here that like I've changed the minimum speed to 0.34 and all the particles are moving. If I were to change both speeds to 0, you will see that, I mean, my particles are still moving because I haven't reset the simulation, but if I do reset it, nothing will move anymore. All right, so this is speed, right? But you might ask yourself, but how come we define the speed here, but also we define the speed in the speed settings of the particles? All right, so what happens is that this speed is the environment, and the environment is a multiplier of that speed. So let's run the simulation again. All right, so my initial speed is 1, right? I can increase the speed here, and basically inside the voxel field, it's a multiplier of that speed. So the darker the color, the smaller the multiplier, so the speed decreases. The larger the number, the larger the multiplier, or like the brighter the color, the larger the multiplier, and the speed is faster. So these two work together. You have the speed here in particles, which is interactive. And in the voxels, you're basically creating an environment in which in some parts the speed is larger and in some parts the speed is smaller. Yeah, so your environment starts to be differentiated, like in real life, like not the whole kind of like universal conditions apply everywhere. There are different patches of your space that have different types of conditions, and by carefully placing those bits and pieces, you can create quite intricate simulations. And it's also, you know, a way of kind of controlling the simulation, because like in this example, for example, with speed, you can see how the speed affects the simulation in a way that's easy to understand. All right, so let's say we have minimum density, right? All right. So what happens here, like the speed is not affected anymore besides this area of controlling it from the particle settings. Now we are talking about minimum density. So what happens is that in the areas that are white, our minimum density is 1. Meaning no matter how much the voxels diffuse and how much the voxels decay, their minimum density will always be 1. This means particles will always go towards them. So you can use minimum density, like a high value for minimum density, almost as an attractor for the particles. And you can see, like in these areas that are darker, nothing stays, and in the areas that are whiter, all the particles have gone there. Yeah, you can see how they negotiate between going inside or outside, but they always go towards the highest values, and they tend to stick there. So this is what the minimum density does. The maximum density, I mean, you can always just play with them and see how they work, but I think that having an explanation helps. All right, so in this case, something similar happened, but the logics behind it is quite different, meaning that in these areas that are black, the maximum density is 0, right? So if you have like a minimum density of 0, it doesn't matter, because every time the minimum density is 0, like that's the minimum value that a voxel can have. But if the maximum density is 0, it means that no matter how many particles you have in those places and how much they deposit, the density will never increase to more than 0, meaning that you will never have particles in those areas. So in the areas that you don't need, you can have the values of maximum density 0, because in those areas, the particles will run away from those areas. The difference is that in this white area, the maximum density is 1, right? When the minimum density is 1, no matter how many particles you have, the value of the density will always be 1. When the maximum density is 1, those values can be from 0 to 1. And you give the particles the possibility to create a pattern there. So they're not confused. They create a pattern because they can manipulate the voxel values. But when you have a minimum density of 1, then the particles won't create anything there. They will just be attracted to those areas. Either way, by playing it will go to, like, you will form an intuition with this, and you can then you will see how to you know, how everything affects everything. We've already talked about speed. Let's talk about sensor distance. You can see that every time I'm changing this, I go and change it in the preview as well. Okay. All right, maybe we need to put some numbers like that. So what happens when we have like a larger sensor distance? It means that we can see further away. When this happens, like the pattern itself is starting to make some transport networks that are larger. So see in these areas that we have a larger number for the sensor distance, the patterns become larger. Let's just increase this here so that we can see a more, so you can see that, let me reset it. So you can see that you have like variations in scale when it comes to the pattern. In these areas where it's darker, the sensor distance is smaller, probably even smaller than the speed. And they create some more intricate patterns. And in the other areas, the patterns are, they have more space, right, in between them. And that's how the sensor distance affects them. Usually sensor distance and speed go very well together. So you can combine something that has sensor distance and speed. All right, so let's say that we have the same kind of multipliers for speed and sensor distance. I want to combine these two. So I'll use the voxel selection union. And combine the first and the second. And these will be my new voxels. And now we should be able to see things a little bit better. I think the difference between speed, the initial difference between speed and sensor distance are quite large. It's quite large. And I might increase the maximum here to 2 instead of 1, so that we have a more extreme example. And you can also see like the speed of the particles. It's faster on the edges than inside. So you can see in the darker areas, the patterns are that the slime mold creates are more intricate, and in the whiter areas, the patterns are more simple. I think if we preview it with this, it's easier to understand. Yeah, so we have these patterns that are more intricate in the darker areas where we have like a smaller speed, a smaller sensor distance. It can see less, it can move less fast. So it will create more intricate patterns. In the areas where it moves as on a highway, like let's think of this kind of thinking as in a highway, you need like simpler like routes, right? Transport routes, transport networks. Okay, so this is how the sensor distance and speed work. We also have the sensor angle and rotation angle, which let's work with them together. Let's reset the simulation because we've reset the. All right, this is going to be harder to see because of the setup. But what happens is that, okay, let's see, 45 with sensor angle and rotation angle by default are 45. If I put the maximum multiplier value at 4, it means that in those areas that are white, in the whiter areas, it will have a very high rotation and sensor angle, meaning they will probably become more insular. Yeah. So you can notice from this one that where the values are very high, this kind of islands start emerging, and when the values are lower, the slime mold creates a pattern that looks like a transport network, and it makes sense. And in those areas, they are more like insular. As I was saying before, when you have like a large rotation angle or large sensor angle, what happens is that you start looking around your tail and rotating around just because you see too much. And then also, of course, every time like an excitement, like an exciting voxel with like a large value comes your way, you will always turn with a large increment, meaning that you will always turn around your tail, right? So this is how this is how you create this insular kind of things. Of course, there's a transition between the insular and the other parts. By the way, don't know if you noticed, but our simulation already starts looking quite interesting and quite different from what we started. I always like to use this preview, but it just takes so much time. So, all right, so this is how it started looking now, and this is with the sensor distance and sensor with the sensor angle and rotation angle. Sorry. You can play around with them. You can do your own versions of patterns, and this will help you make catalogs, play with different kind of settings and see how they evolve. All right, so this is how we define the voxel values and how each one of these values affects our simulation. These are the multipliers, basically voxel multipliers. Then we can use three different ways of combining them. We have the difference, A minus B. We have the intersection, A. We only keep the things that are in A and in B. And we also have the voxel union. Another thing you should take into account is if you right-click on this component, voxel selection union, you have a way of combining them with minimum, maximum, and average. These things also make sense. So think of it like this. In this case, I don't need to assign anything. Any of them will create the same thing because my voxels, here I'm defining the sensor angle and here I'm defining the rotation angle. But when I have two different voxels that define, or the same voxel, but defined with let's say this is the sensor angle and this is the sensor angle as well, like we've done at the beginning, for example. I'll show an example. Right, so if we look at the data and how the data is combined, all right, let me just disable this because it takes some time. Okay, so there are different ways, like if we look at the display of the voxels with the minimum density, so minimum works in a certain way, maximum will give us a different way of combining the voxels, and average will give us a different way. They're pretty straightforward. We're defining voxels. So what happens is that we are merging this voxel position with these voxels with these voxels. So you can see that they start overlapping in these areas, one with the other. And in those areas where they overlap, we have to find a way to manage those values, right? So we can either take the minimum value from the two voxels or the maximum value, or we can make an average. And by combining them in different ways, we achieve different kind of settings. I cannot tell you what those settings are. They will be different depending on what values you use. The best way to visualize them is with this, is to visualize them and see what each change does. And when you're working with creating more complex environments, always use this for visualizing voxels. So if I were to visualize the first ones, they look like this. The second ones, they look like this. And when we combine them, they look like this, right? This is minimum. This is maximum. All right, so they are combined in different ways. This is up to you and what you want to achieve in your example. But just bear in mind that you can combine values coming from different voxels, and you can combine them with this one's difference, intersection, and union. All right. Bear in mind that in this example, we are using the curve attractors. So we have this curve, and we have these voxels. If I were to have like a smaller range, yeah. So this is, you know, I'm modifying the way my voxels look on the go. I can always have it like this. And when I'm running my particles, they will never connect. Because my voxel selections never connect. So I will have a ring doing something there, another ring doing something here. Yeah, anyway, this is how you use attractor curves and you use voxel values. This is like voxel values are a very strong way of designing your environment and of manipulating the behavior of the slime mold with the environment. All right, let's move on to the next one. In the next one, we are going to talk about using an image as the environment for our simulation. In this case, it's going to be a map of the city. You can, like using an image, I found through experience that is the best way. So you can import a city by curves and then use attractor curves. Your definition, especially if you have something that's quite large, will take a long time. But I would say that using an image is a lot faster and a lot easier. All right, so let's just have a look at this simulation. This is going to be a bit more complex, but as a logic, it's not that complex. All right, let me just. So you can see that my slime mold starts taking into account the map straight away. So it only runs inside, like on the streets. It doesn't run outside the streets. And this is all done with the image sampler. The reason why this happens is that so let's look at the voxel values step by step. But just so you know, in the white areas, meaning the streets, we have a minimum density of 0.6. as shown here. And this means, like I was saying in the example before, that every time you have like a large number for the minimum density, the particles will tend to go in those places instead of going in the places that you don't, like the minimum density is 0. It means it can be anything. But when the minimum density is 0.6, it means that you will always have particles going through that area. And this is how you make the particles, for example, stick in your on the roads. That's one way of doing it. So here is my map. I'm sampling the map. I'm getting, you know, the idea is to get like, you have 640,000 voxels. You'll get an image, and you'll get the same number of values. For each voxel, there will be a value from 0 to 1 that will be sampled from that image. Just so you know, in the image sampler, ideally you would use black and white images, and with this channel, color brightness. The reason is that you want to get values from 0 to 1. And the best way is to use black and white maps. All right. Cool. So we have this. We have all the voxels, and we add some values. Now, let me unpreview this. As you can see, something happened in my map. Even though my map is complete in the image sampler, when I preview it, it tends to have these holes inside. All right, these holes are controlled by some attractor points that select the voxels around them. And then I have a distance from that point to all the voxels. I'm remapping those numbers in a way in which I can visualize them. All right, just 1 second until it loads. I've opened the image samplers, and a lot of times it's quite heavy and takes a while to compute. Okay, it's good. All right, so I was saying that I'm taking these points and these voxels around these points. I'm remapping the values. Let's just see how this looks like. All right. So what I'm doing, I'm selecting those voxels with the point attractors, and then I am assigning a minimum density with these values that I've remapped here. Yeah, with these values are mapped here. I'm assigning them to this. But then I also have these values, which were my initial values coming from the image sampler. And they will be displayed at some point. Bear in mind that, like, you know, these are basic Grasshopper components. That are used for display, and yeah, sometimes they just take a long time. There's nothing you can do about it. Maybe in the new Grasshopper, things will start moving a little bit faster, but until then, we have to deal with it the way it is. All right, and when I am combining the two, I will get those holes there. The reason is that I have those holes that are black and I am overlapping them on top of my map. What happens when I combine the two values with the minimum number? The minimum number will be kept at all times. This means that all those areas that are white, like that have streets, will disappear, almost become like, let's say, craters or areas that are not developed. And in those areas, we give space for the slime mold so that it can create its own thing regardless of the streets, right? That's the basic idea with this kind of approach. Right. Good. So as you can see, the slime molds start doing some interesting things in those areas, more organic patterns. And also it follows the rectilinear grid of the city on the other patterns. And this is how they combined. Another trick that I've done here, which made the whole definition a lot bigger and maybe a bit more complicated. But I've also used those points, those 2 points with those 2 attractor points that I talked about with those voxels. I've used them for some other things as well. So I'm also remapping these values from 1 to 2. And I am using the speed and sensor distance exactly like in the example before. This is because I want to differentiate the size of the pattern inside the holes from the other pattern that's on the just following the city grid. So yeah, just so you know, that's another layer of complexity, but the logic behind it, it's absolutely the same. We select some voxels with some attractors, and then we define some values, some multipliers, and we add those multipliers in the defined voxel values component. Then we combine the voxels, and by combining everything, we get this kind of environment that's quite, let's say, differentiated. And you can see that there's a different pattern in this area than in this area. So in the areas where I had those points and those attractors, the patterns almost become like some highways, like larger and less dense. In this area, by looking at the map, in this area, nothing was there, so no streets. And this means that the slime mold can do whatever it wants there. So it's not so constrained, and it does something similar in size with the grid, just because it has those kind of settings. But in the other areas where I've modified the speed and the sensor distance, the patterns are quite different. Another thing is, like, you know, if you let it run, some simulations need to run for thousands of iterations. Some already become uninteresting after 145 iterations. So it's up to you how you dose that in your designs, right? So don't think about slime mold as being this absolutely objective thing that will calculate or give you solutions for everything. I mean, we're not there, not like AI isn't there, nothing is there yet. Like everything we do is, you know, it has the human side to it as well. So you're using an algorithm that does something, but it's up to you at the end to evaluate the performance of that algorithm with your own mind. It will give you ideas and solutions that you wouldn't expect, but don't expect it to yeah, to be like a Swiss knife that handles everything and you can solve all your problems with the slime mold. No, it's, you know, it's an interpretation, as objective as it is by, you know, integrating mathematics and objective things in it. It also becomes very subjective when using it. So yeah, just take that into consideration. And test it. Test if you have a scenario in which you can test in real life if the settings that you used for the slime mold create more like better results, like better performance, then do it before deploying it. Just because, you know, it's an algorithm. It's not gonna solve everything in your life. Anyway, this is the example with the city map. We still have 4 more examples, so I'm gonna try to move to the next ones. But yeah, this is how it works. I'll have a look at the Q&A before we continue, because if I'm doing the next tutorials, then I think we're gonna go into 3 dimensions and they might become a bit more slower and more complex. Yeah, just wanted to free my my computer memory. Okay. Question and answer. It can work on a surface, yes, it can, but it can work, you will see that it works on meshes or like objects in 3D. But it's also, you know, it's like you have to be careful in the way you input the data, because if you have a contoured surface, there was this question, can this work on a contoured surface also? It can work on a surface, definitely. But it's up to you how you input the data so that it doesn't freeze your computer. You have to try different kind of approaches until you find the right way to input data and to run the algorithm. The component that's used to display the trails is so you basically extract the particle trails, and then the component is called GLSL, I think, GHGL, maybe GHGL. Yeah, it's a component that is in Rhino Grasshopper, and you can use it for GL display. It's a different kind of display, and it actually runs on the GPU, and it can create nice graphics. Anyway, if you don't have, if you don't know how a component is, Control Alt and left click, and it will get you to that component in Grasshopper, and then you can analyze it. All right. You cannot use void behavior. Voids are different kinds of behaviors. And yeah, I mean, it's not made for that. You can, like, there are tons of other plugins that help you with simulating voids. This is a different kind of algorithm. It's for slime mold. We can define a more organic design space rather than define spaces like circles. You can define it either by modeling a mesh, you can define it by inputting a curve. It's up to you. The way I've created the definition was in a simple way. So I've drawn a circle, I've extruded it, and inside it I've kept the voxels. Any geometry that you like, you can yeah, you can create you can select the voxels around it, inside it, near it. So it's up to you how you do that. Another person is asking me, is there a way to specify number of voxels per site size? Let's say I have a size of 50 by 50 and I want 200 voxels in it. Well, it's simple. You have to work with the voxel size and with the voxel resolution. If you have 2 voxels and each voxel is 1 unit, then you will have the space of 2 units. If you have the space of 1 unit and you want 2 voxels, it means your voxel size should be 0.5 instead of 1. So it's up to you how you define this, and it's possible, of course. All right, we're gonna talk about 3D formats as well. Somebody asked me a really good question. Have you tried to use your system with a structural analysis system? No, I haven't. But I've been talking about it since Biomorphic Networks version 1. Like, I was hoping someone would use it. So you can use it like, yeah, you can use finite element analysis, get the data from that, and use it as a minimum density, for example. So in the areas where you need material, you have particles running. In the other areas, you don't have particles running. And you will get like some pretty interesting connections between them, which I can imagine that have the potential to be more interesting looking from an aesthetic point of view than those trees that you get from topological optimization, which is like such an overrated and like boring aesthetic for the 21st century, unless you have it on a GPU and you run it by, I don't know, 500,000 or millions of voxels, then it starts becoming interesting. But mostly topological optimization, finite element analysis are more like diagrams. And yes, you can use those diagrams inside nuclei, and I'm hoping that one of you will do that because it will be an interesting result. It can avoid obstacles as well. Like if it ran around on roads, it avoided the empty spaces. The way to avoid obstacles for particles, basically you make areas inside your canvas that have like voxels that have a maximum density of 0. The particles will never go there. So they will avoid those areas. And that's how you use it. So basically, with minimum density, maximum density, and all these kinds of values, you know, you have to understand what they do at a high level, and then you know, the logic of it. And then when you go to specific things, you can make it do specific things. So I could have done 100 components for this. I could have done a component saying avoid obstacle, another one that says go towards obstacle. But there's no point in that, because this kind of abstract ways of thinking can mean more than go towards an obstacle or run away from an obstacle. And that's why, you know, we're explaining these things in this tutorial so that you can know what these abstract values do. And when you play with them, you will see how they start, you know, making sense in the real world for you, for a real world application. But first, you have to understand it at a more abstract, in a more abstract way. All right, cool. So next step is to use go to vector fields. Let's do this because I'm sure you all have a lot of questions. I'll answer more questions later. Cool. So in this example, we have a vector field, and we're basically influencing the behavior of the slime mold through that vector field. Our vector field all right, looks like this. It's been created in Grasshopper with the vector field components. You can find them there in the vector panel fields. You can create line charge, point charge, and so on. This is a very simple vector field. Don't judge me for that. The main idea is to show you how the slime works. You can create very intricate vector fields and see how it goes. But basically, I have this vector field with my vectors, and I have to evaluate my vector field in each voxel position. So yeah, I need a vector for each one of these voxels. Each one of these points will get a vector. And these are my vectors. Vector display. Okay, so these are the vectors, these are the points. Yeah. Yeah. So all these vectors are inputted inside the simulation. And they are done through this instantiate vector field. You need the voxels in which you're going to add the vectors. You need the vectors and you need the frequency. Frequency works the same way as in trails, meaning that if you have a frequency of 1, at every frame, the particles will follow the vector field, meaning that they won't do anything else than follow the vector field. They won't do any slime mold things. They will just follow the vector field, right? Because this is what we tell them to do. Of course, it still does some slime mold behavior, but it's very much influenced by the vector field. And if we have a frequency of 7, as I had earlier, then the slime mold will start doing some other things as well. And once every 7 frames, a particle will follow the specific vector that you asked it to follow when you defined the vector field. So yeah, 6 steps out of 7, it does its own thing. And in the 7th step, it follows the vector field. That's how the frequency works. Another thing that is important is that you have this component called voxel vectors blend. This guy takes a longer time to compute than other components. What it does is, what happens is, like when you have wrap on, when simulating, if the vector here doesn't match with the vector here, it will create a pretty weird kind of transition. But if you set this wrap to true, you will see that this vector here, remember that one particle, when the wrap is set to true to voxel settings, one particle that passes through here will reach this area, just because that's how it works. And then, these vectors, if we have a vector field, ideally we would have them like continuous in a way or another. So that's what wrap does. Blend range, blend iterations, play with them, you will see what they do. Blending makes think of it like this. If in this case the vector field is very smooth, but if you have like a very jagged vector field, which is with vectors going in all directions, blending will basically smoothen out that vector field, and it will make it more fluid and more continuous. The only problem is that it takes a long time to compute, and it doesn't make sense in most simulations with vectors to use it. But in this case, it did, and that's why we used it. Yeah, so this is basically what happens with this part when we follow the vector field. Now let's take the next steps, which are, like, as you can see now, this time it's quite simple. We don't have a lot of things going on inside the definition. Definition is pretty straightforward. Let's activate the particle trails, and we'll talk about what's happening there. So this is our first time when we go into 3D. Well, actually, it's not actual 3D, it's 2.5D. And I'll show you what that means. So what I'm doing is, like, I'm taking the frames, I'm taking the trails, and after each frame, my definition goes one unit on the z-axis. And by doing this, I basically record the movement, but I also manipulate it on the z-axis. Yeah, all my particle trails are here, and I'm moving them on the z-axis. And this creates this kind of geometry. By the way, if you haven't downloaded Dendro already, or if you didn't know already about Dendro, please check it out. It's absolutely amazing. It's a plugin that converts data into geometry. As a data structure, it uses voxels as well. And it's very good at turning points and lines and intersections and crazy geometries into something that we can make sense of. The geometry is not in itself, it's not like a model geometry, in the smoothest way possible, but it's a geometry that would be really hard to model, and it's created from these points, right? So we have a ton of points, exactly 446,000 points. And they are created in a few seconds into a mesh geometry with Dendro. And yes, the operations are crazy fast with Dendro. Yeah, it uses a library called voxel VDB, which uses like advanced mathematics to make everything very fast. And yeah, it's really amazing. So I encourage you to use it in other projects, other plugins. Please check out Dendro. It's absolutely amazing. Our volume can be more rough or more smooth. I've shown you the smooth part. We can also bake this object to be less smooth and have more details. I, to be honest, prefer it more like this aesthetically, but this is subjective, so you can use it in any way you want. But yeah, just so you know, you record trails and you can turn them into geometry. That geometry can be it's almost like, you know, having these 3D metaballs that are meshes and not just curves, if you're familiar with metaballs from Grasshopper. And this is how it creates this kind of geometry, right? Yeah, so we record the trails, like just bear in mind that in this case, I'm recording 100 trails. You can record as many as you want and as many as your computer can take. And yeah, this is how you create 2.5D geometry. And the next step is to go to the next tutorial and go into actual 3 dimensions with the simulation and with everything. All right. So this was vector fields. You can input vector fields from Grasshopper and they will influence the behavior of your slime mold. The slime mold itself is a collection of data from voxels to particles to everything else. And you can make sense of that data. You can also, you know, with the particle trails and the way they are outputted in the trails components, you can also make curves. If curves is what you need, yeah, you can bake them if you like, and you can have curves instead of meshes. So it's really like, this is also for some of you that already don't use this kind of approaches. It's a you know, it's a way of turning data into geometry. So you have some points, you have some, those points are in a list, in a order, and you create lines. Or those points have different values. They can have different, you know, different radii for the spheres they're in, and they can create a geometry in Dendro. So don't be afraid to, yeah, experiment with Dendro and with nuclei and turn data from abstract to geometrical. Cool. Let's go to the next tutorial. And the next tutorial, I'm gonna try to be fast so that we have 10 minutes at the end. So maybe we can answer more questions or talk with you guys. Okay, now I have these two. The tutorial number 7 is in low resolution and high resolution. I'm gonna start with the low resolution, but I have to show you the high resolution as well. So basically, we are gonna run the simulation on a 3-dimensional mesh. That mesh is gonna come, it's a gyroid. If you're familiar with periodic surfaces, it really is a gyroid. The gyroid itself, it's created in this component, which is a C# component. It can be, I mean, it can be many things. It can be a gyroid. You have all kinds of complex surfaces, Schwartz. Yeah, so you can simulate it on this, let's say, surfaces. I mean, you can use this to select the points, like this formula. I prefer to use this formula just because you know, it's really beautiful how you turn, I was just talking about turning data into geometry. Yeah, everything happens in this with mathematical formulas. It keeps the points and creates the periodic surfaces. But you can also use a mesh. I don't have a mesh at my disposal right now, but you can use a mesh with with this component, mesh attractor for voxel. And you need the voxels that you're working on and attractor meshes. And with the range, you can select how many points around that mesh you want to select. Yeah. And if we take a look at it, everything runs on it. The mention that I wanted to make about this is that when we select the voxels, we can select more or less. And the more voxels we select, it will have like this area, which is, it will run on the mesh, but also around the mesh. So the larger this number, the more voxels we'll select. And the less it will follow the mesh, and more it will follow, like it will have something like a thickness. Let's see where's my preview? Yeah. All right. So in this example, you see that the particles and everything already start having a thickness, like the way it's. But then again, the particles have this kind of nature where they start creating networks of transport, and because the thickness is not that big, it will still kind of make them in a way that it's almost like on a surface. But you can try like different types of meshes and different types of thicknesses, and you will see the differences that I'm talking about. Let's see the fancy preview. Oh, sorry, this is the voxel values. Yeah, so we can preview the voxels as well. But I really wanted to see the fancy display more than the voxel values, yeah. All right, so this is how it looks in the low resolution. And I'll open the high resolution. This is just to make a point that resolution is really important and really like helps you design more complex things. All right, so we're waiting for it to load. It will take some time. You know, the problem is that it takes a long time to load, but then you'll see that the definition itself is not so slow. It's not like the algorithm is not running so slow, but I like to like compare it to games, you know, when it takes a long time to load a game, but then everything runs pretty fast. Something similar happens with this as well. All right, so it runs slower from compared to the other one, of course, but it's not as slow as you know, as you would think. All right, let's preview it in a nice, fancy way. All right, so this is with the higher resolution, which is let's see, 300 by 300 by 300. So we have how many millions? 27 million voxels. And in the low one, the low resolution, we have this image and we have 3 million. So you see, like with a, I've only doubled this slider, but the increase in number of voxels is exponential. So yeah, just bear that in mind. But also the design itself, if we look at it, like, you know, it's so different. We can see more intricate things, and yeah, it's just better when you have like a higher resolution. Don't need the highest resolution, but yeah, higher resolution always helps. So that was the main point that I wanted to make with the low and high resolution for this. But either way, like, you need to design your own workflow in which you test things first in a smaller resolution and then you go to a higher resolution. Just because sometimes when you work at a high resolution from the beginning, it just takes too much time to load, to compute. And, you know, as humans, we really tend to appreciate things that happen in real time more than things that we have to wait for. So yeah, it's about you, how you set up your designs. And I think this is a good example of how you set up a design and how you increase the resolution. All right, let's move on to the next example. And then we'll see, we have 2 more examples and then we'll answer some questions. In the next chapter, we go, like in this next example is going to be a little bit more time consuming as well, because we're going to talk about growth. This is another thing that slime mold does. And let's see it grow, because it takes time. All right, so if we look at the definition, more or less it's pretty basic. When it comes to voxels, it's as basic as it can be. And the only thing I'm doing, I'm just running the whole simulation inside this mesh. Anything else is like nothing special with the voxels. But when it comes to particles, we have something called like area particle growth settings. And in the particles, we have these 2 components, actually 3. We have particle depth settings, particle division settings, and particle population settings. Each one of them controls the something about growth. In the population settings, we have a minimum and maximum population. So it's not that hard to understand. These are useful in some aspects because you sometimes don't want your population to go underneath a number, and you don't want it to go to, to make your definition too heavy. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about particle growth settings. The way it works is like this. We have this particle, and it looks around it at its neighbors, neighboring voxels and neighboring particles. We have a range. That range, for example, die range or division range, means how many voxels around it checks. And it checks in those voxels the numbers of particles. And the decision of dying or dividing or doing nothing is based on those numbers. All right, I have a range, minimum neighbors, maximum neighbors. If I decide that overpopulation is when we have more than 100 neighbors in a die range of 2, then it will decide to die. If it doesn't have any neighbors, it's alone, it will die. Maybe of sadness, maybe I don't know why, but it will die. Okay, so we can change these two ranges, these two boundaries of our ranges, so that particles in those ranges die or are alive. The same thing happens with division. What you need to know, and I've highlighted here, is for the death, outside that range, they die. So for the death, you're designing the range in which they live, in which nothing happens. If anything outside that range happens, then they die. In division, you're defining inside that range what will happen. So for example, I am a particle and I have 35 neighbors. We're already too much. There's no too many of us. There's no point in dividing anymore. But if there are less than 30 neighbors around, there's still more space, right? So then the decision is to divide. All right, we have this Boolean so that we can always stop the division or that. Another thing that I wanted to do, like, so as you see, I've stopped the division, and now we should see this number fall. Slowly but surely, the areas that are overcrowded, overpopulated, they will start, yeah, those particles will be removed. Yeah, so you can see the number of particles steadily decreasing. And that's because I've this Boolean toggle set to false for divide, so they're not going to divide anymore. These growth settings are so extremely sensitive that it's going to be really hard to get the right ones. It's hard for me as well. Take this into account because these are some that I stumbled upon after many trials and they work quite well. Start from these ones. During time, I found some more interesting ones as well. Problem was that I did something and I lost them. So that's why I'm saying every time you find something interesting, save it because you never know when you will stumble upon it again, if ever you will stumble upon it again. Another thing that you need to know about that and division is that you have a frequency, yeah? So that is once every 10 frames, we kill particles, or one in every 10 particles, something like that. I don't remember for this. But the larger number, the less frequent the death will occur. And the smaller the number, the more frequent the death or division will occur. Yeah, so just so you know, this is how I hope death and division are easy to grasp. Let's enable this to have the nice preview as well. As you can see, I'm not doing anything with the preview from the beginning. I'm always previewing it at the end. And using the faster preview for the parts in between. All right, mesh preview. Yeah, and if we use the same technique as before, we will get a preview like this of our growth. But there's another way which I kind of like more and find more interesting. We can input in Dendro, we can input curves instead of points, and we can make them quite thin, like really teeny tiny filaments. And yeah, it will create a geometry. It's not going to be that fast anymore. I mean, it's fast, Dendro, it's fast in itself, but with this kind of approach, we're making it like really, really, really work for it. Yeah, it might take a while, but I assure you it's worth it. The results are really nice. Well, I mean, if my computer crashes, at least I've made it until almost the end, because I could have crushed it from the from the first example if I made the settings high enough. But I'm positive. I'm optimistic. I'm hoping that Dendro will do its thing and not run out of memory or something. By the way, when we talk about resources, your CPU will use resources to compute a lot of the things inside Nuclei. But for the environment, the density and of the environment is achieved through high RAM memory. I recommend, if you're like gonna be proficient with using Nuclei, to have 32 gigabytes of RAM. I don't have 32 gigabytes of RAM, just so you know, but it's good, and it would really make you use it in a more simpler way. Nuclei doesn't use the GPU, just for previewing, so there's no point in having like a huge GPU. It doesn't help you. But yes, the RAM memory and the CPU, the processor, are very important. All right. And we can have this, like Dendro can help us achieve this kind of filaments. Yeah, so we can make our geometries look like nests and really show off, you know, the complexity of what happened here with the yeah, with the simulation. I mean, we either have this, or we can have the other one, which was absolutely boring. Just wanted to show them side by side, just so that you can have like a comparison in your mind, and that, you know, you see the difference between using points with like metaballs and using curves. Curves hold a lot more data, a lot more, you know, they hold the history of like where a particle has been in the previous frames, and they show movement. They show a lot more than points. Yeah. So it's the same kind of geometry. It's just dependent on how you how you use that data. And the particles, when you have huge numbers, their trails and the voxels, they hold huge amounts of data. That's why sometimes the algorithms run a little bit slower. But yes, I mean, they hold large tons of data, and it's visible. It shows here that, yeah, they create also beautiful geometries. Okay, we'll move on to the last tutorial, and then we'll take some quick questions at the end. Yeah, so in this one we have growth, but growth that is on a mesh. And I'll show you how I tricked the algorithm to listen to me to create some kind of pillars, and how I guide it. As this is more of a, it's not so much about the algorithm, but more about the strategy of how I went about like designing with slime mold, and not just creating some patterns that run randomly. Okay. So what I'm doing is, like, in this example, my design space is this one. But I'm only starting the particles from the bottom. And I'll actually just let it run and you will see for yourself what happens. You will immediately start seeing like this vertical kind of struts that starts developing. Bear in mind that the particles are dividing and the slime mold is growing right now. So it's growing and developing, but it has some kind of things like some kind of guidelines. And these guidelines come from voxel values, of course. We guide them with voxel values, and those voxel values come from simple geometries. Instead of previewing it, I have disabled it, this component. Sorry for that. But yeah, I basically have this like vertical lines, which we will try to display now, that stop at different heights. And another thing that I'm doing in this example, I need to stop it. All right, sometimes the definitions get really heavy when you have, don't forget the fact that you have it at your, should be here, trigger, and you can stop it from here if you cannot reach the Grasshopper canvas. Anyway, okay, so another thing that's happening, if you look at this, it's denser at the bottom, and the more it goes up, the more, the less intricate the, yeah, the trails become, or the networks. And that's because I'm increasing the speed and the sensor distance, gradually increasing it on the z-axis. And I'm also, you see, this is how the gradient of speed and sensor distance looks on a vertical axis. So it goes at a very fast speed here from a very small speed here. Another thing that I wanted to show you is like this, these parts are attractor curves, which I used for selecting these voxels. And in these voxels, of course, I've added a minimum density of 0.9, meaning that in those areas, we'll always have particles. Particles will be attracted by those areas. And considering the fact that the particles start from the bottom and those lines are vertical, the particles, when they develop, they will mainly develop along those lines because they have the highest values and the particles are attracted to the highest values. So yeah, very simple tricks, but yes, you can create like an interesting design with it. Let's see how our design looks like. This is going to take a long time as well. It's with those fine details, but it's beautiful to look at. You've probably seen it already on Food for Rhino. It's, yeah, it's there in the images and it's in the tutorials. Yeah, but just so you know that the strategy behind it was to gradually increase the speed and the sensor distance on the z-axis so that I have more intricate patterns and transport networks at the bottom and less intricate, more streamlined networks of transport at the top. And I've also guided the particles with high value for minimum density, and that helped to make the whole simulation run on a vertical place all of a sudden. Cool. Let's see the Q's and A's. So we've already answered how to use it on surfaces or B-reps. I mean, if it's a B-rep, you can always turn it into a mesh. Problem is the other way around, how you turn a mesh into a B-rep, especially if it's a complicated mesh. But yeah, you can always turn a B-rep into a mesh and it will run. Okay. Is it possible to fill a shape with the gyroid geometry, say a sphere or cylinder? Of course, it's possible, but it's not the theme of the webinar. So you can just type this in Google and you probably find an answer. That C# component is already in the example files, the one with the gyroid. So it's there. You can double click on it and see how the C# works, or the code, if you have any knowledge on C#. Is there a way to control the iteration numbers that I can stop at some point? Well, that's actually a good idea. I've never done that. I think, yeah, could be an improvement in the future, so that, like, yeah, we can write. Ideally, we would probably, as a new user interface kind of thing, right click on it and then I don't know, right click on the solver and set like a maximum iterations or something, or another setting. Yeah, that could be. Currently, there's no way for that. Sorry. So you just need to yeah, look at the definition and yeah. Yeah, I really like in this area where, you know, things start becoming more convoluted. I really like it. Like, yeah, you know, it's so much to explore with slime mold. And the thing is, like, with generative systems, a lot of times you are so bound to just the playing with some sliders and you cannot control the environment. And this was like a really like a pain point in most generative systems like that have been implemented in Grasshopper. You don't have this possibility of controlling the environment. And controlling the environment, I think, can make the most like kind of impact in a generative system, because you cannot finally control its behavior. But if you create the environment so that it exhibits a behavior in a kind of a certain kind of direction, you will start getting differentiated kind of patterns that will adapt according to your needs. So it doesn't necessarily need to be for transport networks. You might want to create a porous surface for a facade. You might want to analyze things for finite element analysis, and you want to, I don't know, maybe you have some aesthetic constraints that you want to add to it. So controlling the environment is really powerful, and I think that's my main kind of, you know, my main thing that I've done for like this kind of approach for generative systems, that you can highly customize your environment, add an organism in that environment, and see how it will adapt to the environment and to its neighbors so that it can survive. All right, another question from Hyouk Kim. I sorry if I didn't pronounce the name right, but this is a very good question. Is there a way to make the food move? For example, the food could be a column placement and the stream's paths could be a beam and can be analyzed. Yeah, this is very good question. Food cannot move. I mean, it's nothing complicated in terms of algorithms, but it's just gonna be a pain in the ass to compute everything. So imagine that in this last example, it took such a long time to load, the way I was saying, load all the voxels and everything into the solver, and then it kind of like, it wasn't very fast, but not too slow either. So what would happen if we made the food move at every frame? It would have to load everything at every frame, and that, my friends, if we continue, doing things on CPU, that's not going to be possible, not even in 10 years. So hopefully we will, if this doesn't happen soon, I'm not going to use Grasshopper anymore, but hopefully in the near future, they will add a way to program the GPU, which is tens of times faster for these kinds of things than the CPU. And maybe in that scenario, we will have food that's, wandering around. Maybe instead of maps, we will put videos behind, like data, and every frame, everything will change. Yeah, I'm having this kind of crazy fantasy about using it like that as well. It's just that at this moment, it would be too slow, and for people to use it, maybe even 100 by 100 voxels, it's still going to be hard to use. So that's the reason why the food doesn't move, and we have to reset the simulation each time we change something in the voxels. So yeah, this just so you know, but very good question. So the growth example is basically cellular automata ideology. Yes, ideology, yes, but the patterns you get and the way it looks is very different, because cellular automata is a more simplified version of this. It only takes into account population, overcrowding and so on. But when it comes to slime mold, it also has this thing where it creates this kind of patterns, because it wants to not only live and die, it also wants to create networks of transport, so that it can transport nutrients or distribute something throughout its body. So it's very different from cellular automata, but in a way, like the growth and death settings are exactly the same kind of ideology like cellular automata. All right, we have another question. Can the initial plan for the growth on mesh tower start from an urban map and then grow basically to give us an urban landscape? Yeah, you can try it. I don't know, haven't tried it. It could be an interesting example to try and get some beautiful projects. Yeah. Is it possible to make the surface of the growth smooth? This is something you can, like every geometry that has a lot of data can be turned into something smooth with Laplacian smoothing. You even have something in Dendro for making things smoother. Yeah, so you have this thing called smooth volume. You can always make it like that, my friend. If you like smooth things, go with the smooth volume. Give it a lot of iteration and everything will become smooth. In which computer language is Nuclei developed? Is C#? Yeah. Is there a way to control the environment to represent gravity? Yes, with vector fields, you put a vector field that is pointing downwards in all the voxels. And yeah, that will be your gravity. How did I get into simulating slime molds? Well, I've been working with generative systems at Bartlett during my master's. After that, when I was working with Alisa for the Creation Pavilion, I pronounced the name correctly. Thank you for participating, Kim, and yeah, glad you were here. yeah, so regarding generative systems in general, I mean my eyes opened when I was at Bartlett at my master's, and then when I started working with Alisa, she is the master of this kind of systems, and I learned a lot from her. And to be honest, you know, I was using other kind of Grasshopper kind of style systems before, and after a few years playing with it, I actually had like I don't know, I had this period when nothing was exciting from a design perspective anymore. But personally, for me, I'm not saying that, you know, procedural is dead. I'm just saying it was very, like, for me, it was very boring. And at some point, you know, there were this kind of artists or people playing with this kind of particles that were doing some crazy things with movement. Nobody knew if you can translate it into geometry or not, or maybe a few, but I didn't know it back then. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's beautiful. You play with behavior, you play with abstract things, logics, and these things will, yeah, will translate into something that's more interesting than, you know, than maybe something that a human mind can conceive. And I think the potential for generative systems as well as other systems like artificial intelligence is like, how can they expand our thinking? I would probably say that generative systems might be better to start with because the AI is biased. You know, you've seen this last days that a lot of people are posting. There's this tool, I forgot its name, and it creates like this kind of images, but it's biased. You know, it really depends on what kind of images you feed into the algorithm, and it will do something that's cohesive, but with those images, or by blending two different images together. That's how AI works. And you know, after blending 20 different images, maybe you'll get to something original. But I think, like, for example, with generative systems, a lot of the times you get very surprised with what you achieve. You don't expect it to behave like this, sometimes in a bad way, sometimes in a good way. But either way, it's like, that's what I wanted to say, that my passion for generative systems is that it comes from the fact that you cannot 100% control it. You always learn from them, and yeah, I don't know, they're just they're fun to play with. Yeah, and yeah, hopefully after this webinar, more of you will use this in your projects, and we'll see some pretty things happening with Nuclei. Yeah, anyway, thank you for participating. Michael, how do we do now when we have to close everything? Do we just say goodbye and leave, or?
Yeah, it was a very good session, nice and to the point, and everyone, I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for your time on this Friday, Madeline. And thank you for this time you put into this plugin. I'd like to remind everyone, if you like the plugin, you can rate it on Food for Rhino with the stars on the top right of the Food for Rhino page. Always good to show some support for all the free work going around. Yeah, and so after, when video is done processing, you'll get an email for the link and also certificates. And yeah, that's about it. Just a reminder also to follow, make sure you're following Madeline for more updates. All the links are there. And yeah, and other things, just keep in mind about our next week webinars, next 2 weekend webinars, CDNX conference and master's degree. And then this weekend is the master's presentations. You can sign up to view those on our website. Thank you very much, everyone. And until next time.
Bye bye.
See you, everybody.